Welcome to Horrified Stories, where fear comes to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Blood on the Stillwater, the small town of Ravenscroft, nestled on the edge of a vast, dark lake, had always been shrouded in a sense of melancholy. Its residents spoke in hushed tones about the lake, about the eerie calmness of the Stillwater that stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. Some said the lake was cursed, others claimed it was a sanctuary, untouched by time, offering a peaceful refuge to those who sought it. But everyone who lived near the lake knew one thing for sure: the water held secrets, dark, blood-stained secrets. It had been years since anyone from the outside had visited Ravenscroft, but when Elijah Montgomery arrived, he came with a sense of purpose, a desire to uncover the truth. Elijah was a journalist, a man driven by curiosity and a need to expose the hidden stories of the world, no matter how dangerous they might be. He had heard rumors of the lake's strange history, stories of strange disappearances, tales of drowning victims whose bodies were never recovered, and whispers of an ancient curse that clung to the still waters like a fog. Elijah rented a room at the town's only inn, the Old Willow, which was run by a woman named Maggie, whose eyes seemed to hold a lifetime of sorrow. As soon as Elijah mentioned his reason for being in Ravenscroft, Maggie's face hardened. "You're not the first one to come poking around here, Mr. Montgomery," Maggie said, her voice low and weary. "And they never leave the same way they came. That lake, it's not something you should be messing with." But Elijah was undeterred. He had traveled far to get to Ravenscroft, and the mystery surrounding the lake fascinated him too much to ignore. He had heard that the town's residents rarely spoke of the lake, but he was determined to find the answers. His investigation would start with the lake's history, and it would end with the truth, or so he thought. The first person Elijah approached was an elderly man named Silas, who lived in a dilapidated house at the edge of the lake. Silas was known as the town historian, and his frail body had lived through decades of changes in Ravenscroft. His home was cluttered with old maps and books, all related to the history of the town. Silas greeted Elijah with an eerie calm, his wrinkled hands clasped tightly around a mug of tea. "The lake," Silas said when Elijah mentioned his interest in it. "People have always been drawn to it, but not everyone comes back, and those who do, they're never the same." Elijah leaned forward, eager to learn more. "Tell me about it," he urged. Silas sighed and set the mug down. His eyes seemed to cloud over as he spoke, as if the memories were too painful to bear. "It was many years ago now," Silas began, his voice barely a whisper, "a tragedy that no one ever speaks of anymore. There was a woman, Eleanor Blackwell, who lived in Ravenscroft long before the town grew. She was the daughter of the lake's first settlers. They say she fell in love with a man who wasn't meant to be hers, a man from across the waters, but their love was doomed. A storm came one fateful night, a storm so fierce that no one dared venture out into the lake. But Eleanor, she couldn't wait. She set out in her boat to meet him." Silas' eyes grew distant as he continued. "By morning, her boat was found, but Eleanor was gone. Her body was never found. The lake swallowed her whole, and after that, strange things began to happen. People would hear whispers at night, and the water would grow red with something they couldn't explain. Some say the lake itself claimed her, that she became part of it, a guardian of sorts, ensuring that no one else would escape the fate she had suffered." Elijah listened intently, but his skepticism lingered. "Do you believe that?" he asked. Silas looked at him, his gaze sharp despite his age. "I didn't until I saw it with my own eyes. The lake is alive, in a way, and it remembers. It never forgets." Elijah didn't fully believe Silas' story, but something about the old man's words lingered in his mind. That night, he decided to take a walk along the shoreline, to see the lake for himself. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the still water. Elijah's footsteps were muffled by the soft, damp earth beneath him as he made his way to the edge of the lake. As he stood there, staring at the water, he felt a chill in the air, a sudden drop in temperature that sent a shiver down his spine. The lake was eerily still, its surface reflecting the moonlight like glass. For a brief moment, Elijah thought he saw something beneath the surface, something moving in the depths. But when he squinted, the water was once again calm. Suddenly, he heard a faint noisy splash, followed by a soft cry. Elijah spun around, his heart racing. There was nothing behind him, only the vast, empty expanse of the lake. He laughed nervously, chalking it up to his overactive imagination. But deep down, a gnawing feeling of unease settled in his gut. The next day, Elijah set out to speak with more of the townspeople, hoping to learn more about the lake's strange occurrences. As he made his way into the town center, he noticed something was off. People were whispering to each other, casting furtive glances in his direction. It wasn't until they approached the market that he learned why. A young woman named Margaret, a local waitress who had been one of the few to speak openly with Elijah, had gone missing the night before. Her disappearance was sudden, with no signs of struggle, and no one had seen or heard anything unusual. The townspeople were tense, their fear palpable. Elijah couldn't help but think of the story Silas had told him. Had the lake taken another victim? And if so, why? The investigation seemed to go nowhere. The police had no leads, and the townspeople were too afraid to talk. But Elijah knew one thing for certain: the lake held the answers. He needed to return. That night, he decided to take a boat out on the water, hoping to uncover whatever lay beneath the steel surface. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, he paddled into the heart of the lake, unaware of the horrors that were about to unfold. The moon hung like a sickle in the sky, casting long, sharp shadows over the water. Elijah paddled slowly, the boat rocking gently with each movement of his oar. The stillness of the lake was unnerving, almost as if it were holding its breath. The faint sounds of the night, distant rustling leaves, the occasional croak of a frog were swallowed by the oppressive silence. It was as though the lake had decided that nothing would disturb its calm tonight. As Elijah ventured further into the water, a strange sensation crept over him, as if unseen eyes were watching from the depths. He shook off the feeling, telling himself it was just his nerves, but the chill in the air told him otherwise. He was too far from shore now to turn back. The silence was heavier out here, and the water, despite its glassy surface, seemed to whisper something beneath its depths. The boat creaked under his weight as he pulled his flashlight from his jacket pocket. Its beam cut through the dark, illuminating patches of the lake, but the water seemed to absorb the light in unnatural ways. As his gaze shifted to the dark expanse, he noticed a faint, reddish tint in the distance, barely perceptible but enough to make his heart race. It wasn't blood, but the reflection of the moon in the water seemed to shimmer oddly, as though it were distorted by something beneath. Was it the wind, or was something alive under there? Suddenly, a sharp sound broke the stillness, a crack, followed by a splash. Elijah whipped his head around, heart pounding in his chest. The water seemed to ripple, but nothing surfaced. His hands gripped the sides of the boat as the sense of something unnatural deepened. There it was again, another splash, this time much closer. Elijah's pulse quickened. His gaze darted across the water, trying to find the source. Then, before he could react, the flashlight flickered, its beam dimming and finally going out. Damn it, Elijah muttered to himself, fumbling with the flashlight, his eyes wide in panic. But before he could turn it back on, the boat jerked suddenly. A sharp, forceful pull yanked the vessel sideways, causing Elijah to lose his balance and fall to one knee. He frowned. See, beneath the water, something was moving. It wasn't just the current, it was a shifting, deliberate motion. Something was dragging beneath the surface, something big, something that was coming for him. Elijah scrambled to steady himself, his heart hammering in his chest. His eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the movement beneath the water. Then, as quickly as it had started, the lake returned to its eerie calm. For a moment, everything seemed still again. The boat drifted silently, bobbing lazily in the water as if nothing had happened. Elijah's breath came in ragged gasps. He wasn't sure if he was imagining things, but the feeling of being watched never left. The odd sense of dread was growing stronger by the second. He turned around, eyes scanning the water for any sign of movement. Then, without warning, a shadow erupted from the depths. Something massive, black and slick, burst from the water with a force that sent a wave crashing over the sides of the boat. Elijah let out a scream as the creature twisted, shadowy figure lunged for him. Its form was too distorted to fully comprehend. Long, sinewy limbs with webbed, clawed hands reached out from the water. Its eyes gleamed a sickly yellow as it opened its mouth wide, revealing sharp teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. Before Elijah could react, it was upon him. With a desperate scream, he tried to push the creature back, but its grip was too strong. The boat capsized with a violent force, throwing Elijah into the cold, black water. His body was weightless as he sank beneath the surface. Gasping for air, he tried to kick his way back to the surface, but the water was thick, almost as if it were pulling him deeper. He could feel something clutching at his legs, dragging him downward. Panic set in. Something was beneath the water. It was alive. As it descended into the blackness, Elijah could see shapes moving all around him, figures, faces, limbs that seemed to shift between human and something otherworldly. He couldn't tell whether it was a hallucination or something more sinister, but he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. His vision began to blur as his lungs screamed for air. But just as it thought he would drown, something grabbed him cold but firm and yanked him upwards. He gasped as it broke the surface, coughing and sputtering. His heart pounded, but he was alive. For the moment, Elijah's hands gripped the edge of the boat, pulling himself back into it. He barely had time to process what had just happened before the creature reappeared. If I see a human face, but twisted and bloated, broke through the water. It was a woman's face, her features contorted in an expression of agony. Elijah, the voice rasped, a distorted whisper carried by the wind. He frowned, staring into the water. For a brief second, he saw her face clearly. Then it disappeared beneath the surface, replaced by more shadowy, indistinct shapes. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the water grew calm once more. The woman's face was gone. The shadowy figures disappeared into the depths. But Elijah knew it wasn't over. He was no longer alone on the lake. The spirit of the water was awake, and it had seen him. When Elijah returned to the shore, drenched and shivering, he stumbled toward the town, his mind racing. He barely noticed the streets around him as he made his way to the inn. He needed answers. There was no way he could leave without understanding what had just happened. Inside the old willow, Maggie was waiting. She looked at him, her face drawn and pale, as if she had been expecting him. "I told you not to go," she said softly, her voice trembling. "The lake has a way of calling people, Elijah, and once it has you, it doesn't let go." "What the hell happened out there?" Elijah demanded, his voice harsh. "What was that thing?" Maggie's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and sorrow. She walked to the window and stared out at the dark water, as if trying to summon the courage to speak. "That woman you saw, one who called your name, was Eleanor Blackwell. She's the one who started it all. She and her lover tried to escape the curse of this place. But it's never that simple." Elijah listened intently as Maggie told him the story. Eleanor Blackwell, the daughter of the first settlers in Ravenscroft, had fallen in love with a man from across the lake. Despite the town's warnings, their love, forbidden and reckless, had led her to the water on a fateful night when the storm took her. But what Maggie didn't know, and what Elijah was beginning to suspect, was that Eleanor's love was not the only thing the lake had claimed. "The lake feeds on the restless," Maggie said softly, her face pale. "It brings back what it wants, what it needs. And once it has tasted your blood, it will never forget." The night stretched endlessly as Elijah sat in the dimly lit room of the old willow. Maggie's words echoed in his mind like a warning bell. And yet, despite the terror that had gripped him, he couldn't bring himself to leave Ravenscroft. There was something deeply compelling about the mysterized curse, the lake, the people who lived in its shadow, and how Eleanor Blackwell's face haunted him. The whisper of her name on the wind, the pull of the water. He couldn't ignore it. His hands still trembled, his clothes soaked from the lake, but the chill had settled deep into his bones. It was as if the water had marked him, and no matter how far he ran, it would never let him go. It had been to Ralph's face, the shadowy figures, the hands that dragged him down. The lake had something else in mind for him, and for the first time, Elijah realized he wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of the story. The following morning, after a restless night filled with nightmares of dark waters and faces emerging from beneath the surface, Elijah ventured to the Ravenscroft library. It was a small, musty place filled with old books and forgotten stories, but it held the key to the town's history and perhaps his own survival. The librarian, a gaunt woman named Edith, watched him with narrow eyes as he asked for information on Eleanor Blackwell. "There are things in these books that no one speaks of, young man," Edith said, her voice low. "The town's history is bloodied. It's always been tied to that damned lake." But Elijah pressed her, and eventually, Edith led him to a collection of ancient journals and town records. As he thumbed through the pages, he discovered fragments of stories that seemed too strange to be true. The Blackwell family had been the first settlers in Ravenscroft, but there were rumors that their origins were darker than anyone had let on. They had come from a distant land, fleeing some unspeakable tragedy. And the lake, it had been there long before they arrived. Elijah found a series of journals written by Eleanor's father, Samuel Blackwell, that painted a chilling picture. The Blackwells had always believed the lake was a living and tight spirit that demanded sacrifice to remain at peace. Samuel had kept the family's most sacred rituals a secret, but his writings revealed that the lake was not merely a body of water. It was a sentient, malevolent force, and it had an insatiable thirst for blood. The story deepened when Elijah uncovered a journal entry dated the night of Eleanor's disappearance. In it, Samuel Blackwell wrote about the storm that had torn through the town and the desperate decision Eleanor had made to meet her lover, the man from across the lake. Samuel's words were filled with regret and fear, as though he knew that the act would set something in motion, something that would never be undone. "I fear for my daughter," Samuel wrote, his handwriting trembling. "The lake calls to her, and it will never release her. The bloodline of the Blackwells is tied to it. As long as we remain in Ravenscroft, we will be its victims." Elijah's heart raced as he absorbed the full weight of Samuel's words. The lake wasn't just a geographical feature, it was alive. It was ancient, and it had chosen them. The Blackwells had been his first sacrifice, and Eleanor was the latest in a long line of offerings. But Eleanor didn't die, at least, not in the traditional sense. Elijah realized, with a chill creeping up his spine, that the water had taken her spirit and it had given her something in return. She had become something else, something twisted, something that now haunted the lake. Elijah's newfound knowledge weighed heavily on him as he returned to the inn. But Maggie wasn't there. In her place stood Silas, his ancient eyes gleaming with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. "You know what's coming," Silas said before Elijah could speak. "You're not the first to ask questions. Many have come before you, seeking the truth. But the lake's toll is steep, and once it claims you, it never lets go." "What do you mean?" Elijah asked, a sense of dread filling his voice. Silas leaned closer, his whisper barely audible. "Eleanor isn't the only one. There are others who tried to escape the lake's grip, who thought they could leave and live their lives. But the lake's curse doesn't end. It follows you, hunts you, and in the end, it drags you back." Elijah felt a chill run through him as he realized what Silas was implying. "You're telling me that the lake, it follows people?" he asked, barely able to comprehend it. "That it takes the mountain?" "It doesn't just take them," Silas interrupted. "It makes them part of the lake. It uses their blood, their souls, to sustain itself. The lake doesn't just want to claim lives. It wants to feed." Elijah's stomach turned. This wasn't just a ghost story, it was a cycle of bloodshed and sacrifice. And hell, Elijah was in the center of it all. "What do I do?" Elijah asked, his voice tight with fear. "How do I stop it?" "You can't stop it," Silas said, shaking his head. "You can only hope to survive it. The lake is older than this town. It's older than the Blackwells. There's no escaping it." Elijah felt a wave of hopelessness crash over him. He had come to Ravenscroft seeking a story, but now it was clear that the story had already been written and he was a part of it. Days passed, and Elijah's obsession with the lake only deepened. He couldn't shake the feeling that the water was calling him, beckoning him into its depths. It was as if the lake was waiting for him to return, to offer himself as the next sacrifice in its endless cycle. But it wasn't Elijah who disappeared next. Maggie's daughter, Lucy, a sweet, quiet girl of 18, went missing the following evening. She had been out on the boat, just as Elijah had been, and no one had seen her since. Her disappearance mirrored Margaret's quiet, without struggle, as if she had simply vanished into the air. Elijah couldn't ignore the connection. The lake was feeding again. Desperate to find answers, Elijah sought out Silas once more. The old man was sitting by the edge of the lake, staring into the dark water. "I told you," Silas murmured, his voice filled with a sorrow that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. "The lake never forgets. It's taken her, just as it took Eleanor." "But why?" Elijah asked, his voice breaking. "Why does it want us? What is it after?" Silas looked at Elijah, his face pale. "It's the blood, the Blackwell blood. It's the lifeblood of Ravenscroft. And hell, it has found a new vessel, a new victim." "Elijah," he continued, his voice grave, "if you stay, you will be its next. You must leave. Leave before the lake decides to claim you as its own." The air around Ravenscroft had become suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was thick with dread. Elijah's mind raced with thoughts of the lake, its ancient hunger, and the bloodline that seemed bound to its depths. It wasn't just a curse, it was a force of nature, ancient and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to claim its next victim. The disappearance of Maggie's daughter, Lucy, had ignited something within him, a fire that burned with the need for answers, for resolution, for revenge. He couldn't just run. He couldn't leave the people he had come to know, people like Maggie, who had lived in the shadow of the lake all their lives. No, he had to face it. He had to confront the lake. He stood now at the water's edge, staring at the glassy surface that reflected the moon, its stillness mocking his fear. The lake was calm, deceptively so, but beneath its serenity lay something terrible, something ancient, waiting for its next offering. And that offering Elijah knew now would be him. The following evening, Elijah made his decision. He couldn't wait any longer. The lake had already taken too many lives. Too much blood. Maggie's words haunted him, but they also steeled his resolve. Silas had said that the lake would follow him no matter where he went, but he wasn't about to become another part of its cursed cycle. He took the boat again, just as he had the night before, though this time he had no intention of letting fear guide him. As the boat drifted into the middle of the lake, he felt the familiar unease settle in, the sensation of something watching him, waiting. His heart beat faster, and his palms were slick with sweat as he gripped the oars, but he had come too far to turn back now. The wind stirred, and the surface of the water began to ripple, distorting the reflection of the moon. Elijah's breath quickened. Something was wrong. Without warning, the water splashed violently, and the boat jerked to one side. Elijah's instincts kicked in as he tried to stabilize the vessel, but a powerful force rose from beneath. Something emerged, a creature, or rather, an entity, its massive, gnarled arms reaching for him. It was the shadowy figure he had seen before, but this time, it was clearer, more defined, a grotesque blend of human and something far darker. It had no facsimile, a gaping mouth that stretched wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Its eyes glowed faintly, yellow and lifeless, but they were locked on him. Elijah, a voice rasped from the creature's depths. You cannot escape. He struggled to hold the boat steady as the water churned violently around him. The creature's form rippled, twisting as if it were made of the very water itself. And then, in a horrifying flash, Elijah understood this was not just some ghostly apparition. This was the lake itself, in its physical form. It was a manifestation of everything the lake had consumed, and it would not stop until it had devoured him too. The creature lunged, but Elijah managed to dodge, scrambling to the edge of the boat. His hands gripped the sides, but the force of the water threatened to pull him in. Panic surged in his chest as he realized how helpless he truly was. The boat rocked violently, and just as he thought he would be dragged under, he saw something that stopped him cold. From the depths of the lake, another figure rose, a woman's face, twisted and pained, her long hair floating as if suspended in the water. It was Eleanor Blackwell, but her face wasn't the same. It had become distorted, her features a grotesque mask of agony. Elijah, her voice was a faint whisper. Help me end it. For a moment, the world seemed to slow, and Elijah felt as though he were trapped in a dream. Eleanor's face was not the face of a victim. It was the face of someone who had become part of the lake itself. She was lost in its depths, a prisoner to his thirst and hell. Her soul was reaching out to him. Without thinking, Elijah reached for her, his heart pounding. The lake's surface turned beneath him, and as his fingers brushed against her face, everything changed. The world around him seemed to collapse. The water, the boat, the air, they all vanished. He was submerged in the depths of the lake itself, suffocating in the cold, oppressive dark. He was no longer in the boat. He was in the place between worlds, a place where the lake held all its secrets, all its lost souls. As he sank deeper, Elijah saw it, the true form of the lake's curse. The water wasn't just a body of liquid. It was an ancient prison, a boundary between the living and the dead. The lake had consumed the souls of the Blackwell family, and in return, it had given them something twisted, something that kept them bound to the water forever. They were not ghosts, not spirits. They were part of the lake. They were its vessels. Eleanor's form twisted in front of him, her features contorting in pain. You must end it, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the crushing depths. Release us. Free us from this place. Elijah couldn't breathe, but he knew that he had to act. He couldn't save Eleanor, she was already lost. But there was a way to break the curse. There had to be. He reached deep within himself, feeling for the small talisman he had taken from the library, the only thing that might help him. It was a small, black stone, inscribed with ancient symbols that Maggie had said were tied to the lake's original rites. It was the key to breaking the cycle. With trembling hands, he held the stone before him. The lake responded immediately. The water began to swirl around him, its violent pull dragging him deeper. The creature, whatever it was, screeched, its form writhing in agony. But Elijah didn't let go. He focused on the talisman, on the ancient symbols carved into its surface. The lake's hold on him weakened, and the pressure around him lessened. The dark shapes in the water souls of the Blackwells began to dissipate, their forms breaking apart as if they were being torn from the lake's grip. But the creature was still there, thrashing in the water, its yellow eyes locked on him. It wasn't finished. It would never stop. And then, with one final cry, the talisman pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly glow, releasing a shockwave that shattered the surface of the water. The lake screamed an inhuman, guttural sound that reverberated through the air. Elijah was thrown from the depths, his body catapulted back into the boat. The lake, its monstrous form, its hunger, and its cursed seal of it faded away. When Elijah awoke, he was back on the shore, drenched, disoriented, but alive. The lake was still, the moonlight reflecting off its surface like glass. The creature was gone. The souls of the black whales had been freed. For the first time in decades, the curse of Ravenscroft had been broken. Maggie found him there, hours later, standing at the edge of the lake, his eyes fixed on the still waters. She said nothing as she approached. There was no need for words. The battle had been fought, and the curse was over. But Elijah knew one thing. He would never forget what he had seen in the depths. The lake might have been silenced, but it would never be forgotten. And somewhere, deep beneath the still waters, the lake waited. If you like the story, please like, share and subscribe the channel.